Welcome to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education AI Literacy webinar series. This is session one, where we're going to explore the department's AI resources, provide an introduction and a big picture overview. My name is Greg Kuliwick. I'm the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education AI Strategy Consultant, and I'll be leading you through the archived webinar recording today. We're going to kick off the recording with recognizing the educational vision of the Department of Education and aligning that with AI literacy, the content we're exploring today. So the vision outlines that all students are known and valued, all learning experiences are relevant, real world, and interactive, and individualized supports enable students to excel at grade level and beyond. As we're kicking off the series with this overview webinar, we're going to keep these educational vision components in mind as we're exploring AI literacy and make sure we align all of our understanding to AI literacy to these three components of the Ed Vision. Now, the structure of the webinar today, it's really broken into two parts. And you can see on the left-hand side of the screen here, we're going to start with the AI literacy support and the online module that's available to educators across the Commonwealth. Once we kind of dig into that online module, we're going to provide an overview of that resource. We will explore the core AI literacy principles, the 5 principles that ground our perspective on AI literacy. We'll look at the key elements of that course and the structure of the course. And what we're going to do is start to investigate the concept of AI literacy through a scenario of a school administrator that's using generative AI for a very specific task. And we're going to align that scenario to the 5 core principles throughout the session. More on that when we get to that component of the video. Subsequently, we're going to shift to part 2 of the session, which is exploring the Massachusetts guidance for artificial intelligence in K-12 education. That is a 70-page PDF document that's available on the department's AI and education webpage. What we'll look at in that document as well is the 5 principles for ethical AI use. Then we're going to look at the structure of that document, key components of that document, how to take advantage of the document in your context, in your school or district, and then we'll look at some key questions that are outlined in that document. Now, if you'll notice the second element in each one of these parts, we have core AI literacy principles and then principles for ethical use. What we're then going to do is take these core literacy principles that are outlined in the AI literacy module, and we're going to align them to the principles for ethical use that are outlined in the guidance document, and then recognize that if we take these 5 core principles and these 5 principles for ethical use, it allows us to really carefully examine any AI use case across any education context. And we'll do that as we move throughout the video. Now, let's just paint a big picture recognition of where we are with AI and education. So, educators across the Commonwealth are navigating how to harness these tools to support teaching and learning, while also addressing emerging concerns related to academic integrity, bias, data privacy, misinformation, and instructional quality. So we like to be really transparent that while we recognize the potential that's kind of embedded in these generative technologies, we have to be equally aware of the concerns and some of the challenges and risks associated with the technology, and we'll address those throughout the session today and through the subsequent 5 parts to this webinar series. So let's start with the resources themselves. So all links in the video will be provided in the video description below. And this is the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education's AI page. You can see the link on the screen here and in the video description below. This is where you can find the 3 key resources that are readily available. The Massachusetts guidance document, the AI literacy module, the one in the middle of the screenshot here, and the AI literacy module to the right with the gold seal. Now, both of those literacy modules are openly available to educators and administrators across the Commonwealth. The one with the gold seal will provide you a certificate of completion, and it makes you take the course step by step. Whereas the one in the middle of that screen there, you can openly explore any concepts you want in the course and click through in any way that you'd like. Now, the structure of this module is really built for educators in the K-12 space. The purpose is to help all educators develop a foundational understanding, and it's a completely self-paced online experience. And like we mentioned, there's 2 course versions. Now, taking these online module, I think it was about a 2 to 3 hour experience when I worked through it. But essentially, This intro webinar and then the 5 subsequent parts are really going to dig into each component of this course and really provide a structured walkthrough of the course and all the concepts are explored. Something to keep in mind, if there's anything that you see in this video series or webinar series, you can find that companion content in the module itself and you can explore it in greater detail. With that setting the foundation, let's actually get into the AI literacy core principles. So we have 5 core principles that are outlined in this online module for you. And I like to think of them more of like skills and dispositions about our ways of thinking, not necessarily specific elements of the technology themselves. So let's look a little bit deeper. We have grasping the fundamentals. This is really understanding the basic mechanics and basic kind of functionality and behavior of generative technologies. We have centering human intelligence. This is making sure that human oversight steers all interactions and engagement with generative AI. We have guiding and judging generative AI. This has to do with maybe the technical capacity of creating meaningful prompts, interacting in meaningful ways, and skillfully leveraging the technology. We have prioritizing people. This is thinking about privacy, dignity, integrity over efficiency and convenience, maybe getting a little bit into data privacy with transparency around use, those sorts of concepts. And then the last core principle here is exploring AI's impacts. This is the impact of the technology beyond our individual use when it comes to the environmental impact or misinformation or academic integrity, these sorts of concepts that we can explore, not touching the keyboard and manipulating it, but those kind of like tangential ideas. So with that, understanding these principles, let's now take a look at a scenario that's going to guide us through understanding these AI literacy principles. Let's begin with Dr. M, a school administrator. So Dr. M has been struggling to make monthly faculty meetings more engaging, more productive. Dr. M wants to create meeting agendas that build coherently over time, connecting monthly discussions around the school's improvement goals rather than treating each meeting as an isolated event. They also want teachers to be fully engaged and participatory in the meetings. Now, with that as the context, let's look at each AI literacy principle and see how it aligns to this scenario. Think about grasping the fundamentals. When Dr. M first used generative AI models, they were surprised by how well it was able to transform just a few bullet points or ideas into a clear and coherent paragraph. It felt like magic. Then one day, Dr. M realized they didn't know a lot about how the AI tools actually worked and functioned. They decided to play a bit and then asked it this classic challenge for generative AI technology. How many R's are in the word strawberry? And it replied, there are 2 R's in the word strawberry. No matter how Dr. M prompted it, the model insisted on that incorrect or wrong answer. Their sense of the model's magic began to fade, leading Dr. M to look further into why this technology that seemed so sophisticated could not answer such a basic question correctly. As they learned about the model's underlying functionality, they realized this is the important part. It can't think like a human. It uses statistical modeling to synthesize text that has a good probability of being close to what the user is looking for. This basic understanding helped Dr. M feel more confident using AI as an assistant rather than treating it as a reliable expert about anything. They now approach it with curiosity and caution, recognizing both its usefulness and its limitations. And this idea that generative AI can't think like a human is apparent when we interact with the tool. Even the text that is generated is not entire words, it's fractions or tokens of words. So even the word strawberry might be broken into 2 or 3 tokens, making it challenging for the technology to simply count the number of R's because it's not recognizing the entire word, just elements that construct that word. Let's move to the next principle here, centering human intelligence. So now with an awareness, Dr. M, that the technology has limitations, it doesn't think like a human, how can we center Dr. M's expertise, Dr. M's human capacity and experience and context when using the technology? Dr. M is not an expert in AI, but they've learned quite a bit by reading and through professional development workshops offered by their district. They consider themselves to be fairly strong grasp of the fundamentals of the technology itself. They also hold an advanced degree in school leadership and possess a deep understanding of how educators need to be supported in their own learning and professional development. So let's stop there for a second. If we think about the context of Dr. M wanting to map out faculty meetings that are coherent, they're linked together, together, they're aligned to the school goals, they allow for engagement by the teachers. Dr. M has that expertise already. We don't need to kind of hand all of that work over the technology. Let's continue. Dr. M uses this knowledge to brainstorm first with no AI what they want their meetings to look, feel, and sound like. They review some of their relevant materials from graduate school, set clear goals with what they hope to accomplish for their faculty and students through strong collaborative meeting times. And this is the important part. When we think about centering human intelligence, we often like to think about it in terms of a human-centered approach, meaning human, original human thinking with context and expertise and awareness and insight. Then take all of that background knowledge and domain expertise and skill and ability, create the scenario, identify the problem, describe what the goals are, be wildly clear and explicit, and have high levels of expectation with the technology. That's done first. Then take that and go to the generative technology. And we'll give you an example of a prompt in a moment from Dr. M. Then have it generate the output, but we don't simply take the output as a completed, usable output. We have to validate that, evaluate it, check it for quality, for consistency, make sure it aligns to what we're doing. So in this way, with a human-centered approach, the generative AI or the technology is acting like a member of our team that we're relying on for maybe some new ideas, new approaches, ways of thinking about things differently, or providing different ways of structuring the meeting, but not as a whole tool to generate the entire meeting without any human oversight. This is centering the human capacity. Let's move on to the third principle in action here, which is guiding and judging AI. After carefully considering the task at hand, Dr. M feeds the AI model with prompts that provide clear guidance, and we'll show that prompt in a moment. They critically review each output that the model provides. For example, after reviewing the first result of the prompt, they instructed the AI model to, quote, reference the action steps from previous meetings and show clear connections to our school improvement plan. So let's take a look at the prompt itself. Now you can see this one is wildly structured. We have a goal. Dr. M wants to create 3 meetings sequenced to help middle school teachers strengthen their relational practices in their classroom. Our school climate survey showed that 65% of students often feel misunderstood by their teachers. I want these meetings to build on each other and result in concrete changes in how teachers connect with students. So a very clear purpose and intention. Now let's get into the structure and the format, which are almost constraints of what the output can look like. For each meeting, provide a 75-minute agenda with specific time allocations, interactive elements that get teachers talking to each other, and clear action steps that connect to the next meeting. We have a planned sequence. Meeting 1 is October. Let's develop foundations. Meeting 2 is in November. Let's start to apply these strategies. Meeting 3 in December. Let's reflect and make this sustainable. We go to specific requirements. Again, more constraints. Each meeting should reference and build on the previous one. We're demanding that connection. At least 70% of each meeting should be teachers talking and thinking together rather than the administrator or the meeting leader kind of doing all the speaking in the front of the room. And it should be kept wildly practical as well. So we think about all these experiences. Now we're able to provide a little bit of overall context. And then the last one now, with all these constraints, is thinking about the overall context and giving the tools some context for the scenario. Now, what I like about this approach too is the guiding and judging. We're not using the technology simply because it exists. We're using the technology because there's a problem that has been identified. The problem can be articulated. There's human awareness and context and understanding and expertise, and that's being brought into the technology. And now we're looking at the generative AI as a means to solve a reasonable and meaningful problem, not using it simply for the sake of using it. And that's another way to think about guiding and judging this technology. With that, let's keep moving to the fourth principle, prioritizing people. Dr. M is careful not to provide the AI model with any school data, nor any information or text that they don't have permission to use. Instead, they use the goals established in their school improvement plan and summarize what they know to be true about their district, that students can sometimes feel misunderstood by teachers, that teachers often feel overburdened and disempowered, and that teachers have little opportunity to build strong shared practices around responding to challenging student behaviors. So that is all separate and not connected to individual people, individual students, or school names. So that's the kind of prioritizing people and data privacy and anonymity when we're using these tools. In addition, they are open with their faculty and district colleagues about when, how, and why they use the generative technologies. Their faculty meeting agendas include the line, I use generative AI to help me plan meetings that are meaningful, well organized, and make the most of our time together. They also provide a link to some of the most frequent used prompts, which colleagues are free to adapt and use themselves. So this level of transparency, whether you're using or not using the technology, is really helpful in building that culture of trust and prioritizing the people we're working with and not centering the technology itself. The last element here, exploring AI's impacts. Now, the way I described this earlier is this is kind of beyond the use in touching the keyboard in that moment. These are all the kind of like tangential or connected things separate from prompting and getting outputs. So Dr. M knows that educators in their district hold a wide range of opinions about generative AI, and they make a conscious effort to model not just responsible use, but also curiosity and caution. They lead with insight and humility, modeling continuous learning about new and emerging technologies. They are also careful to ensure that their own use of AI doesn't come across as pressure for others to follow suit. Recently, Dr. M came across a news story about the amount of energy that AI requires. They capitalized on this opportunity, asking their environmental club to read the story, think about what recommendations they might make about AI use in schools with the environment in mind. So this is a really good example of kind of like leveraging the skill and ability, making this a real world connected experience and engaging students in this discussion as well. Now, to think about this even a little bit more deeply, we have this helpful resource here, and we'll link this in the video description from the University of Maine. It's called What Uses More. It's an online tool that's openly available, and what it allows you to do is compare a kind of non-AI energy use case. Maybe it's streaming a video on demand on a streaming service, or hosting a Zoom call, or charging your phone, or using social media. And we can compare that technology use and the amount of energy that's consumed to using a generative technology to generate text or images or 100 lines of code. And it gives you maybe a little bit more of a concrete example of how much energy is being used. So we've kind of reached the end of part one of this intro session. You can see we've used this scenario on the left of the administrator planning a faculty meeting or a series of faculty meetings. Now there's two other scenarios that are embedded in this AI literacy module, one about a fifth grade teacher and how their use case connects to all of these core principles, and one about a high school English teacher thinking about academic integrity. So we've explored the one on the left, and we've kind of given you a broad overview of our approach to AI literacy and how it aligns to these five kind of ways of thinking or dispositions. Now let's transition over to the other side of this intro session, and it's exploring the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education's guidance document for AI in K-12 education. Now, this guidance document kicks off by trying to build common language. So the way I like to think of maybe the principles that are outlined here and the thinking here is we're trying to really understand the technology a little bit better. Maybe not so much the thought processes and the dispositions around interacting with it, the AI literacy component, but really like the nuts and bolts. So we can break this down in the document into kind of like three ways to think about what AI is. We have predictive AI that's based on patterns of behavior. This might be a predictive technology where if a student gets a certain number of problems correct, it's predicting the next problem set that they should engage with. I always like to think of the predictive technology or predictive AI in terms of like when I get into my car in 3 in the afternoon and my mapping app already is suggesting that I want to go home because that's my behavior and it can predict that behavior. Now we have generative technology, which is the one that is addressed most often, the discussion we're having kind of at this point in schools, where generative technology or generative AI, we can provide a prompt, a text prompt of some sort, or an audio prompt or an image prompt, and it will generate an output based on its training data, which is potentially all the words that are available on the internet. And that's the training data, which we're not privy to necessarily know the full extent of what the training data is. and then it generates an output based on it predicting the likelihood of certain tokens of words being generated to make what appears to be a reasonable output that fulfills our request. That's what we're dealing with most days in education right now. Now, another component or a kind of an extension of generative AI would be agentic AI. And the word agent is embedded in agentic, or the word agency is connected to that word. So I like to think about agentic AI is the technology have an agency to solve problems that it identifies based on an initial request. So even if we were to make an analogy to the real world, where if you went to a travel agent, you might say, well, I really want to go to a warm destination in February. And they would plan multiple different options and travel options and accommodations and things you would do while you're there and different price points. So the agent is determining all these different ways to solve that problem, the same way that agentic AI can do that. Now, one of the concerns that's emerging is agentic AI being used to independently complete coursework in online learning environments. And that's something maybe we'll see more of in the coming months, thinking about the impact of agentic AI in education. Right now, we're thinking about generative AI, primarily text in and text out. Now, the structure of this document, it was built for school leaders and district administrators. The purpose is to help schools navigate and develop their own AI guidance in their own policy documents. This resource is not a document that can be filled in based like a template to make a guidance document or make a policy document. This is one to guide a district or schools thinking about developing their own. It's broken down into 7 key domains, and there's a workbook approach that allows schools to evaluate where they are, work on their internal mechanisms, draft their own policy, their own guidance, and then revisit this document as there's really high quality questions to reflect on your process and your growth and where you are in terms of the role of generative AI and your approach to generative AI in your school or district. Now, the document is grounded in principles for ethical use, similar to the principles we talked about around AI literacy. But these principles, I think, are a little bit more concrete and tied specifically to the technology, not necessarily in ways of thinking. So, as districts adopt and integrate AI across instructional and operational settings, it's essential to ground all decisions as well as guidance and policy in shared ethical values. These principles reflect Massachusetts' commitment to a public education system that fosters equity, transparency, trust, and human dignity. With that, let's take a look at these kind of like 5 foundational principles. We start with data privacy and security, like a very concrete, specific thing to think about when using generative AI. Now, what might this look like in a school environment? Our school community is taught how their data is used when they interact with AI systems. We have to be aware of if we're going to use generative technologies or generative AI in a school setting, we have to think about data privacy. Where are our chats going? Are they part of going back to training these systems? Could they become available outside of our school domain? Am I safe to upload sensitive kind of student or personnel or any data into these systems? So these are all things we have to be aware of and make sure that we're not using tools that are maybe just publicly available. We're using tools that are approved by our school or district or our technology department, and we're cognizant of not putting sensitive data into these tools, because if we're not using an approved platform, it could end up all of our interactions part of training the technology itself. The second kind of policy guidance foundational principle here is transparency and accountability. What does this look like? Possibly public facing, the school or district maintains a public list of digital tools and describes what each one of them does and how it's used. So this is the generative tool we're using. This is the portion of the school community who has access to it. Maybe it's just educators. Maybe there's another tool where students have access to it for different purposes. What this can also look like is educators modeling transparency themselves through attribution and citation. We're using AI to generate classroom materials. So if a teacher, for example, is mapping out a new project or an element of a project or a classroom activity, they can include a citation on that assignment that generative AI, this model, this date was used for an interaction to create elements or the structure or the scheduling or the approach or to rethink some of the activities in this project or lesson. And that's a really good modeling for students around accountability of use and transparency of use. The third principle here is bias awareness and mitigation. What does this look like? Maybe its potential for the procurement process for new tools includes an analysis of harmful bias. If we're thinking about adopting a generative AI platform, it would be important to stress test that platform to look for potential bias that's embedded in the technology. What this can also look like is an evaluation of existing edtech platforms that have integrated generative AI into the tool itself. So increasingly, we're seeing educational technology tools that are rolling generative AI into them for various purposes. Those platforms also have to be checked in some capacity for any bias that's embedded in the output. So this is something that could be done periodically, quarterly, a trimester, yearly, because the technology is evolving and we have to be aware of this evolution, both of the training, of the system prompts, and the nature of the technology itself and the behavior. It doesn't stay static all the time. The fourth principle here is human oversight and educator judgment. What does this look like? Principals and staff who use AI to help with operational tasks like rostering, scheduling, or communications take care to review the outputs for accuracy, appropriateness, and quality. This is similar to kind of like centering human oversight. We always have to think about using generative AI in ways where we have domain expertise or awareness, and we don't simply take the output as a final product. All of the output has to be vetted, evaluated, checked for appropriateness and quality. We can't simply point to it and go, well, a generative AI tool made it. The user is ultimately responsible for the output and what they're going to do with that output. And the last one here, really tied to an education setting, is academic integrity. So, what might this look like? Teachers and students know and understand what meaningful use of AI is in their classroom. Simply because the technology exists, because we're talking about AI literacy, it does not imply in any way that there's an expectation of student use. There is the ability for students to leverage the technology in meaningful ways. There's opportunity, unfortunately, for students to violate academic integrity expectations or policy in their school or district if it's used in not so responsible ways. The important thing here is to make sure that there's clear communication around when can it be used, what does meaningful use look like, what does a high quality prompt or interaction look like, to make sure we're still allowing the student to clearly demonstrate their understanding and have a meaningful academic experience. Now, when it comes to these five foundational principles in the AI guidance document, we're allowing schools and districts to kind of self-evaluate, right? So we haven't started thinking about this yet. We're beginning to explore and understand this. We have some practices in place, but they're a little bit inconsistent. We have consistent policies and practices in development, and all the way to we actively apply this principle in our school setting, decision making, and we have ongoing evaluation. So the purpose of this guidance document is not to dictate what policy might look like or what academic expectations for AI use might look like. The purpose of the guidance document is to help schools reflect and think about their values, their beliefs, and how they might be able to use this document as a roadmap to develop their own policy or guidance. One really helpful element is in page 17 of the document. We break down all seven domains, equity and AI, legal foundations, literacy and teaching about it, literacy and teaching with it, academic integrity, district operations, and we allow schools and districts to self-evaluate. So we can self-evaluate from we're just beginning to explore this all the way to we're starting to pilot or we're sustaining and adapting our approach all the time. So page 17 of this guidance document is this really helpful self-evaluation tool to help schools map out where are they right now, where might they be able to go. Now, what we're also going to link in the video description below is a digital version of the self-evaluation tool that any school or district can take in a digital setting, not in the guidance document itself. So one last kind of nod to the guidance document. We also have these helpful one-pagers that break down this really thorough document into more accessible one-page settings that could be used in department meetings, district meetings, leadership meetings. So start to think about these different domains of generative AI and how they might impact and benefit a school setting and some challenges they pose as well. Now, the whole vision for this guidance document, whereas the AI literacy course is to be able to increase educator awareness and educator comfort and insight and knowledge, the purpose of this document is to act as a roadmap, not a script. Local context matters. District will engage with these ideas in different ways. Implementation will evolve as the technology, policy, and pedagogy continue to shift. Our hope is that these principles, frameworks, and examples provide a strong starting off point for developing guidelines, policies, and practices that are both forward thinking and grounded in the community values of that particular school or district that's using this guidance document. Now, what we've done so far is we've looked at the AI literacy principles and we've looked at the AI guidance document principles. So I have them both here on the screen. We have the AI guidance principles for ethical use on the top. I like to think of that as specifically around like domains of impact, the domain of data privacy, the domain of transparency, the domain of bias, the domain of oversight, the domain of academic integrity. The AI literacy principles, I think about those more in terms of like dispositions or ways of thinking. We're grasping fundamentals, we're centering human intelligence, we're guiding, we're prioritizing people, we're understanding the ethical implications and impact of generative AI. Now, the beauty here is that we've take both five from the guidance document and five principles from the AI literacy module, and now we can address almost any scenario. So let's go through five scenarios together. The high school history teacher that's using AI to develop a lesson plan about World War II. I like to think of this in terms of okay, the educator has to think about bias awareness and mitigation. The data set might be biased that's going to help generate the output. The lesson plan might come from a skewed or biased perspective. The educator must be aware of this when using the technology. And also, if we center human intelligence, we're relying on the domain expertise and the knowledge of that educator to first do some brainstorming and some outlining and mapping separate from the technology. Here's what I know and believe about what I want to do with this lesson. Then we go to the technology. We ask for some support around a specifically well-designed prompt. Then we evaluate the output. That's the human machine human approach. And now we can take these kind of like two principal frameworks and then really address this scenario to make sure the teacher is thoughtfully and meaningfully using the technology. Let's go to another one. A district student services director and special education teachers that are using AI to develop IEP accommodations. We have to think about data privacy and security. We can't simply take IEPs with student names and personally identifying information and drop those into an AI model just because we need to look at accommodations that we want to modify. And we also have to think about prioritizing people and having trust and not providing this information to the technology. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't use generative AI to help us develop IEP accommodations. We absolutely can do that as long as the language is separate from the individual and it's not connected to any one person. We're not providing any potential impact on data privacy or individual information security. Let's look at a third one here. A high school student in an AP class uses school-approved AI platforms in research and the writing phase of a capstone project. So the AP has guidelines for their capstone projects around how generative AI can be used by students. We address this academic integrity principle. Academic integrity and generative AI student use can coexist as long as students understand what the expectations are, the limitations around use, and to make sure any use of it won't violate an academic integrity expectation they're setting. In this case, it might be the AP capstone project guidelines for AI use. Any prompt that we craft has to align to those guidelines, and we're not violating any academic integrity expectations. And we also have to grasp the fundamentals, recognize that there are limitations around the technology. They do sometimes produce output that can be described as a hallucination, content that's inaccurate. So it requires an awareness of that to validate and check any output that's generated. We'll look at a few more scenarios here. So the classroom teacher using AI to map out and plan a new project. Now, in this context, I think about We have to be transparent with the students. We did use the technology to help us. We have to be aware of any bias that might exist in the output. There's implications around using generative AI to produce lesson plans or produce projects that might be a little bit teacher centric. So we have to be aware of that in the output. And we have to have extensive human oversight and judgment of the output. We can't simply take that project and deploy it. We need to validate it, review it, maybe discuss with colleagues and determine if that's something we want to move forward with. We have to center human intelligence, human, machine, human, and we have to guide and judge the outputs. We have to create a really well structured, carefully crafted prompt and have high levels of interaction to get exactly what we want out of it. We have high levels of expectations, really clear, particular, and precise prompts. We can generate really helpful content. The last one here is a school administrator that's using AI to analyze and evaluate responses to a school-wide survey. So maybe we have teachers filling out a form of some sort. We're collecting information and we want to be able to sort through this really effectively. It would be important to not take those lines of entries with potentially teacher names connected to them and any identifying information and simply dump that into a generative technology to evaluate and make connections between the responses. We might be able to like separate the responses from the user that submitted them, and then that might be a reasonable use that doesn't violate any data privacy concerns. And we want to prioritize people and make it clear to educators in this context that, like, yes, I'm using generative AI. I'm going to read all of the responses and get my own insight, but I'm going to use the generative technology to help me get better insight, make deeper connections so I can really understand the data that's been provided. And I'm going to separate it from any individual so there's no data privacy concerns. So we did it. We made it through the kind of intro session to this webinar series. I really appreciate you joining me. Like I said, any links or specifics that were mentioned in this introduction video, they'll be available in the video description below. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next part of the video series, which is going to go live on January 13th, where we're really going to focus on that first principle in AI literacy of grasping the fundamentals. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you in a future video.